All right. Cool.
Yeah.
I'm just going to read the intro and we can get into it. Does that sound good?
Okay. Yes.
All right. Here we go. What is up, guys? Nasir here, and welcome to the KharmaKast, a podcast where I just kick back, chill out, and have a relaxed conversation with creators I admire. Today we're joined by Hannah Witton, a sex education enthusiast who's made videos on everything from long-distance date ideas, measuring my vulva, and how to send nudes. She's incredibly open, breaking down barriers and normalising taboo topics that most of us are way too scared to talk about. Hannah, welcome to the KharmaKast.
Woo! What a professional intro. I love it.
Thank you very much. I'm a little bit rusty for sure. I haven't done this in several months. You're the first one back.
Couldn't tell.
Couldn't tell. Fab. So Hannah, welcome to the KharmaKast. Thank you for agreeing to come on.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I know I've got a lot of questions to ask you, a lot of things that I'm interested in. For anyone who might not know who you are or not have seen your channel before, could you just give us like a brief intro or about me section?
Yeah. So I guess I'm like an OG YouTuber. I've been making YouTube videos for like over 10 years. I mostly do, like you said, sex education videos. But recently I also started a second channel as well, where I can put my non-sex ed stuff, because it used to be a big hot mess of all of it on one channel and it made no sense. I also have a podcast that's called Doing It, where I interview people around topics around sex and relationships and things. What else? I just love nerding out about sex stuff. But then I also love nerding out about like productivity and organization stuff, which is how I've met like people like you. And
I'm sure we have lots to talk about there.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I mean, you seem really busy. I'm sure you are really busy. You've got all these different channels. I know you've got your Instagram pages as well. I saw you were doing the creator table talk, something along those lines as well.
My pre-pandemic event for creators. Yeah, no, I've not quite had the capacity to keep that going in a virtual way.
No,
but I just love talking with other creators and like really getting into like the nitty gritty of the behind the scenes of our businesses, and then also just kind of like the emotional well-being side of being a creator as well.
Absolutely.
So I wanted, with the Creator Table Talks events, I just wanted to create a space where it was like peer-to-peer education support, kind of learning environment together, which is fun. I managed to host 2 events before the pandemic happened in the before times. Yeah.
I mean, part of the reason that I started this podcast was for a very similar reason. I wanted to know the behind the scenes behind all these creators' lives. How do they deal with things off camera? How are they managing and juggling all the business aspect of making videos with whatever else they've got going on in their life? Definitely something interesting. Hannah, I want to jump right into it. You make videos on the internet about sex.
Yes, I do.
Yes, you do. So is this something that you've always been comfortable with? Is this something that you've grown into? How did this all start for you?
I think definitely grown into. I think I've got like a few different like origin stories that when pieced together, it kind of like, it makes sense. That's why she became this person. And I grew up in a very like open household around these kinds of topics. And my sex ed in school was like mediocre at best.
Yeah. As it is in most places, right?
Yeah, unfortunately. And then I remember being in college, like sixth form college in the UK, and getting into an argument with my RE teacher about why they wouldn't teach us about contraception.
What's RE? Sorry, I'm not familiar.
Like religious education class. I went to a Catholic college.
Okay, that explains.
And so they weren't allowed to teach us about that stuff. And I got very angry. And this was when I was like 17. And then when I was about 18, 19 was when I discovered YouTube and just started like watching loads of videos and started watching lots of videos about sex and was just like, oh my God, like, why wasn't I taught this? This is like absolutely ridiculous that I have gotten to adulthood. Like I was 19 and was like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Wasn't taught this in school. And then also I was just like really into YouTube and had started making my own videos that weren't about sex to begin with. But I, as I like gained a bit of an audience, like a very small audience, and I could see that they were mostly young women, I just was like, I want to give back and I want to use this platform, this small platform that I have, like for good. And talking about sex just like felt like the obvious thing, like kind of like having a calling in some way. Because I was like, this is something that I'm comfortable talking about. This is something that I'm really interested in. And this is something that can benefit a lot of people, and not a lot of people are comfortable talking about it. And so like, if I am just able to like start that conversation, then that'll be a positive thing.
Yeah, I mean, like honestly, I think the content that you create is so needed and so valuable for a lot of people. Sex is something that is just not talked about. And you know, I'll speak for myself. Like I hadn't spoken about sex to another human being for the longest time, till I was in university. You know, it was always something that you kept private. It was always something between you and your partner. You know, in my household, I don't think the word sex was ever mentioned growing up, like even until I went to university. And so I think it's really important work. And, you know, in researching for this podcast, I read through a lot of the comments on your videos, and everything is just so supportive. You know, people are really saying,
good. You probably read more than I've read.
Oh, we can definitely talk about that, about the comments and videos and stuff. But yeah, you know, for you, why do you think it's important to talk about sex openly?
So I think people disregard sex as this like unimportant part of your life that you can just like compartmentalize into like, this is just my sex life, without acknowledging that so much of the stuff that surrounds sex seeps into all of our life. So if you think about like our relationships and how that plays onto our self-esteem, just general life confidence, medical stuff as well, like as you probably know, stress levels, mental health, politics, your rights, healthcare, like
you're so right.
Just in terms of like equality as well, like especially if you're like an LGBTQ plus individual, and lack of sex ed there, and how it intersects with other things like racism and disability too. Like I could get on my soapbox for so long about just like, sex is not just about sex, like it's about everything, like and sexual well-being is a part of your well-being as a human being in general. And so, you know, having healthy romantic relationships, healthy sexual relationships with other people, but also like with yourself, can have a massive impact on just your mental health and your well-being and in general.
It's so true what you said. You know, that we think of sex as my sex life, something separate to everything else that I have going on. But it's absolutely true. It does affect your mental health, your self-esteem, how you're feeling throughout the day, your conversations with other people, really everything. And
it works the other way around as well, where like your non-sex life will impact your sex life as well.
Yeah. You know, it's something that we don't spend enough time on. Like we worry about how can I be more social, or how can I get better grades in school? But we should also be like, how can I be a better partner? How can I have a stronger relationship? These are things that we could actively work on.
Yeah. And one of the misconceptions that we have about sex and sexuality is that we assume that it's like in our nature, that as soon as you hit 16 or 18 or whatever, you know, the ages where you want to become sexual, like you're like, I know exactly what I'm doing. This is human nature. I know how people rub bodies together. I know how people have healthy, consensual, pleasurable sexual experiences. When actually, no, these are all things that we learn, and we learn them from our family. We learn them from media. We learn them from porn. And we will always learn them from all of these different places. And unless we have like a comprehensive, inclusive sex education to kind of like balance all of that stuff out, we're still learning all of these messages. Like, I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that like sex is natural and we all know what we're doing. And like you said, like we learn about like, you know, how to make YouTube videos or like how to work better and how to socialize better and like, and all of these things. But people feel like that they've failed if they have to learn how to do relationships and sex better.
That's very true. It is kind of assumed that everything should just be well. Yeah,
exactly. They're like, oh, if I don't know what I'm doing, immediately off the bat, as soon as I start having my first sexual relationships, if I don't know what I'm doing, and if this other person realizes that I've no idea what I'm doing, then I've failed. And that's so sad to me, because one of my favorite things about sex, and I think one of the things that we often run away from, but actually is something to be embraced, is the vulnerability, because it is so vulnerable. And the not knowing what you're doing is part of that. And it's absolutely fine. And you can figure these things out as you go along. But trying to pretend, like we have this pressure to pretend like we've got our shit together and we know exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
We know exactly what buttons to hit. You're like, oh yeah, I'm a great lover. I know exactly what I'm doing. And it's like, do you know what? It's fine to not actually think that. Like, it's fine to figure it out.
These voices and these messages are so important to be learning when you're younger, when you're first getting involved in sexual relationships and like discovering even your own sexuality and whatever. Because I don't want to say it's too late when you hear them at like 25 or 30, but like you've already had so many years of being used to one thing and having your own internal thoughts and feelings about you and sex and partners. And it's like, okay, well, now I'm 25. Why am I learning this just now?
Yeah.
And coming to terms with it just now.
So much of adult sex education is unlearning.
Yeah.
You've got to do that first before you can even like start to like add on all of the fun stuff. First, you have to like strip back and be like, if you have low desire, that does not mean that you are broken. And like, if your body works like this, guess what? You're also not broken. Like just like, if you have these sexual desires, or if your body works in this way, guess what? That's normal. Like so much of it is just like unlearning all of these really just really narrow messages around like what is a normal, healthy and appropriate sex life.
Narrow and generalized.
That box is so small.
It's so small.
Most people do not fit in that.
Exactly. It's so generalized that it's supposed to be like a cover statement or a cover like blanket for everyone, but most people aren't even close to that.
No. And even if you are cis and straight, even if you're monogamous, even if maybe you're mostly vanilla, like even if you do fit most like dominant sexual identities, that narrow box is still too narrow for you, I'm afraid.
It's very true. You know, like I'm always preaching on this channel for students to study however they feel comfortable, study the way that works for them. I mean, we should be teaching the same things around sex life and relationships, because it isn't just a one statement fits all, one blanket fits all. Really important message. And, you know, I hope a lot more young people get to hear you say these things, because it is really important, really powerful, especially at that age.
Thanks. Yeah. It's super important. I just want people to know this, because I just want people to feel good in their bodies and like have fulfilling and satisfying relationships and sex lives.
You know, from your videos, it's exactly that. I watch you and it seems like you're just saying like, guys, like I just really want you to know this information. I want to get it out there so that you can be as comfortable and as free as I am. And you know, when you see that in a creator, it comes across so authentic and so like relatable. And I'm sure that's a lot of what's contributed to your growth and success of your YouTube channel.
Yeah. Thank you.
I wanted to ask, when you started getting into making these types of videos around sex ed, how was the sort of reaction from your friends, your family, other creators in the community? Was it all smooth sailing? Did you have any like bumps in the road?
I think it was all smooth sailing. I think because my parents are like pretty chill. I think the only like real bumps in the road were just kind of like with making YouTube videos in general. because it was 2011 and it was still very weird.
Yeah.
There was definitely no like, oh, you can make a job out of this, you can make money out of this, or this is something that like will make you popular. It was like something that non-popular people did.
Yes, that was looked down upon. You were a nerd, you were weird, you were strange. Yeah, definitely.
So it wasn't actually the sex ed stuff that kind of like raised some eyebrows. It was just the like making YouTube videos in the first place.
Yeah. Okay.
But very quickly, like, over the years, it was just like, as I started making like a little bit of money from it, as I got lots of like opportunities to travel because of it, and was like meeting lots of cool people were like, oh, this is really weird that this is a thing that you can do. Yep. I was getting free stuff, and then suddenly my friends are like, oh,
get me some of that free stuff.
Yeah. Well, now they can't complain because I often give them free sex toys that I don't need.
Nice. Okay, there's a symbiotic relationship.
Exactly.
Okay, I mean, yeah, so I don't know why. I just kind of assumed you've been a content creator for like 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. And then I think it was on your Instagram, you were saying like, oh, a decade of making YouTube videos. And I was like, wait a minute.
Decade? I've been around for a while. Mm-hmm.
Wow. I mean, how have you sort of kept that up for this long? How have you been excited about it, energized, motivated? 10 years is a long time.
Don't know. Yeah. It really is. I think because like the structure of my business has changed over those years. So what I'm doing right now, like even though I'm still making YouTube videos, feels very different to how I was making YouTube videos like 10 years ago. So the things that like keep me going, because boy, do you need them, is fear. No, actually, that's actually quite
taking a break in the algorithm.
Yeah. Oh my God.
A little bit.
Fear is definitely a motivator, but if I'm being a bit more positive, it's just introducing new projects to things that I'm doing. So like over the years, I've written books, I've done podcasting, I've done live events, I've done like travel content. I don't know, just like I've introduced different series on my channel, and then I've taken those series away and then introduced new stuff. Like,
so you've got loads of variety. It's not been the same thing for 10 years.
I've worked with editors and assistants, and so and I've now moved into this new like office studio space. So I think for me, as long as I always feel like I'm evolving in some way, then it feels different. In the early days, it was definitely a case of like, I felt like I was just riding this wave because I was just like, who knows how long this will last? Like, my channel is growing, like things are going well. I'm just going to ride this wave and see what happens. And then there was like a shift, and I can't remember exactly when this was, when I was just like, oh, I can't actually afford to just rely on riding the wave, because I was like, well, what if the wave crashes? And whereas before,
more serious.
Yeah. And so whereas before I was like, I'm just going to ride this wave, and we'll see what happens. If it crashes, it's fine. And then I got to this point where I was like, okay, actually, no, I need to be the person controlling the wave. I can't be riding the wave. I need to be the wave.
Right.
And so that's when I sort of started taking like the business side of things a bit more seriously, and trying to figure out like how to create a sustainable business doing this, especially when like, my YouTube channel in terms of subscribers isn't growing at the rate that it was like 5 years ago, but I'm making more money than I was back then. So like, there are ways
for sure
to be really smart about it and figure all of that stuff out. And so I was just like, do you know what? I'm actually going to, instead of thinking of this YouTube thing as a beast that is completely out of my control, I'm going to try and navigate it,
take advantage of it.
I'm going to try and actually find the things that are in my control and really go for it.
Push on them. That description that you had of like you were riding this wave and then you said, okay, I want to control the wave. I think that's really accurate. And I'm kind of going through that transition period right now. I've been riding this wave of just every single week. What video do I want to make this week? This sounds like fun. Let me make it. Okay, film, record, edit, upload.
Oh my God.
And move on to the next one.
I remember those days.
Yeah. It was just like week by week, like, what do I feel like doing now? This is really fun. And every video gets views. Everything's doing well. You know, super happy, blah, blah, blah.
When I was in that stage, sometimes I would literally like have an idea for a video, write it, film it, edit it, and upload it in one day.
Yep. And
Does
you're
that
so
happen
drained.
these days?
No.
Absolutely not. Because I can't rely on waking up one morning and just like having the motivation and having an idea.
Yeah.
Instead, I'm like, okay, this afternoon, I am planning all of my videos for the next month. And then I plan when they're being filmed. And then I wake up one morning and I look at my calendar and I go, right, that's what I'm doing today.
Yep. That's the transition that I'm having now. Partly because just like that, like fire and passion and motivation that existed at the very beginning is sort of like, it's changing. I don't want to say it's gone, but it's like, it's changing. And also, you know, as I get more closer and closer to being a doctor and more of my time is spent in the hospital and on studying for exams, and then I'm going to start working next year, I can't just be like, oh yeah, I feel like filming a video today. It's going to need to be very organized and very structured. And that's the transition that I'm moving to now. I'm actually really excited about it. There's a lot of safety in knowing, here are my planned videos for the next month, and I'm going to film them on 1, 2, and 3 days, and then they'll get edited. And there's a lot of like comfort in that instead of this week by week change around that I've been used to for a long time.
Yeah, it gives you freedom. Like it feels like, oh, if you schedule everything like that much, like when you're driven by the passion and the love for it and the spur of the moment inspiration, sometimes we assume that is what freedom is, but that's just not sustainable long term.
It's not.
And it's like, go when you're feeling that and when you're in that stage, like absolutely take advantage of it and like do that. But also it is not sustainable. And so you will at some point, if you want to continue transition to more of a like structured and like scheduling content kind of thing, like you said. But it gives you that freedom. It's not that you are constrained by it, because you still ultimately can make your own schedule. I find a lot of freedom in knowing what videos are coming out and knowing that it's all under control. Absolutely. And knowing that I don't have to worry about what next week's video is going to be. Absolutely. Like, I'm like, we got this. It's fine. And do you know what's really interesting is this whole analogy works for sex too and relationships, just with like the passion and the drive and the spontaneity, like at the beginning of a relationship, which absolutely ride that wave when you're there, but it's not sustainable. And so when you're in a long-term relationship, you actually have to consciously and intentionally make plans to be sexual together, or like you can't just rely on just being like, I feel like having sex right now. You actually have to cultivate a kind of like a context within the relationship where that's what you want to do together. Anyway, that's my...
let's go back to the sex for a bit, because I got carried away asking you questions about YouTube, and I've just got
I love talking about all of it.
Great. Well, I've got some time. So like what would you say is sort of your like primary demographic? Who's watching your videos and gaining the most value from them?
So according to YouTube and like Instagram statistics, it's young women. So it's what's their age that they're mostly? They've grown up with me. So that used to be like the 18 to 24-year-olds, but now it's the 25 to 34-year-olds. That's so cool. Which is quite nice, because I'm 29. So, but I think it's still like, my average viewer is probably just a few years younger than me. But I would say on average, like quite a similar age. The platforms that I use do not gather data on like, queer people or trans status and things, but that's something that I've like polled my audience on before. And my audience is super queer as well.
Super
which is
queer.
Really fun.
Okay. I mean, like honestly, I was mostly asking you from your experience, like from reading the comments, from who recognize you on the street, not necessarily demographic data. Like,
from the comments and from people that I meet, I always got the impression, this is before I started like polling my audience.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, YouTube doesn't tell me the sexual orientation of my followers, but when I meet them in person, and when I read their comments, like it's not all straight people for sure.
Yeah. Do you think there's a tendency for people who are queer to maybe be more open about their sexuality, more likely to discuss it, or anything like that?
Maybe, but only because they've had to. Because LGBTQ plus people are even more failed by a lack of sex education or bad sex education. And that's so for them, they are actually, it's like more crucial for their own understanding of themselves and potentially also their own safety to seek out this information. And so often they go to the internet to find information about sexuality, about gender.
Good point.
Yeah. And so I think that is why a lot of my audience are LGBTQ plus in some way, because they're often, unfortunately,
they need the information the most.
Yeah, because they're failed the most. Yeah.
I mean, if we think there's little sex education, there's way less, gay education or queer education. Like, and even me, I grew up in Greece. The idea of being trans was just never mentioned to me, genuinely. Like, until I went to university, this is when I started realizing, this is a thing, and I started learning more about it. But it's something I had no education on growing up. And even being gay or queer is something that, like, was really never mentioned, never taught. Even in our sex ed classes, it was always, the very basic, this is this, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You're lucky if you get any kind of sex ed, and then like you're even more lucky if they include any acknowledgement of LGBT plus people in that.
Very, very true. Have you had any backlash or any negative reactions to some videos that you've made based on the fact that they might be a taboo topic or something that people don't talk about much, anything like that?
Yeah. I got more of it when I was like growing, when you're on that like uphill trajectory. And so like being
shown to like everyone.
Yeah. And there was a time when like a lot of my videos would end up on like the trending page on YouTube and stuff. So like not as much nowadays. But also I read less of the comments. So like I see less stuff. Like I'm now at a point where I'm like, I'll read the comments within the first like few hours, maybe day of a video going live. And then after that video is dead to me.
Is that because you like don't have time, or because you're like looking at the comments as a negative, like might put you in a negative headspace or anything like that?
I don't have time. It's definitely a big part of it. But also the most valuable comments come in like in the first 24 hours. Yeah. And then after that, it's just people who have no idea who I am, so they don't have the context.
Sorry, 1 second. Let me just get the door.
Oh, no, go for it.
What an interruption.
No worries.
So sorry about that.
No worries. It happens.
People who don't have the context after 24 hours will be commenting.
Yeah. So the people commenting after the first 24 hours, they don't know who I am. They don't like have the context of like the wider body of my work. And so they just tend to be like less constructive and a bit more negative. And I've definitely have like, I play the YouTube game. Like I understand titles and thumbnails and things. And there have been a few of my videos that have gone like viral outside of my audience, especially ones that are about boobs. And the demographics on those videos is it's mostly older men watching it. And the retention is about 15 seconds because they click on it expecting one thing, and then they're like, wait, I didn't sign up for this feminism. And then they leave, and they might leave a comment before they leave, just being like, more tips, please. So that's fun. Yeah.
Those are sort of the comments that are just like, it's easy to ignore. Like I have no reason to take anything you say into account or like actually internalize it and process it. It's just like, leave me alone.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. Cool. Something else that I wanted to ask you about, Hannah. And I asked you if you were comfortable talking about this before you came on the podcast, because I didn't want to overstep any boundaries or anything. But you've made quite a few videos about having a stoma. And I saw in your channel banner, I think it was, where you say something and disability. So can you talk to me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I've got ulcerative colitis. I'm sure you've got some like medic listeners who are like, I know what that is.
Sure, yeah.
But if you don't, it's a form of inflammatory bowel disease, which I've had since I was 7.
Okay.
But when I was 24, 25, I basically had a really bad flare-up, and I needed emergency surgery, and they removed my colon, and I now have a stoma bag, so I have an ileostomy. And that was at the beginning of 2018. So at this point, I already was doing YouTube as my full-time job. I was talking about sex on the internet, and then I disappear for a month because I was in hospital. And when I came back, I talked about what happened, basically, kind of like explained where I'd been and what had gone on, because obviously I was then in for like a good long time of recovery as well. And actually I ended up having to have a second surgery because I had adhesions, which was not fun. So basically the entirety of 2018, I was either ill or in recovery. Does
not sound like a fun time.
It was honestly the worst year of my life. And so a lot of my content started kind of being about that, mostly because it was all that I could think about, because my whole bloody life had changed. Of course. But also because one of my lifelines when I was post-surgery in hospital was videos and blogs from young women with stomas. Because the materials from the hospital is just like an elderly couple like rowing a boat. Bad. And I was like, I do not relate to this. But I found people like me, my age, young women, showing off their stomas, talking about their experience, like what they eat with a stoma and drinking alcohol with a stoma and outfits with their stoma and all of this stuff. And it was so valuable to me. And I was somebody who already had a platform. And I was like, okay, well, those people gave me so much that maybe there are people in my audience who already have stomas, or who may at some point in the future need a stoma, or know somebody with a stoma. And so I was like, these people help me so much. So I just like want to pass that on, I guess. And the response was amazing. There was so many people who who since then, either they already had stomas, or like I said, like people who are finding my content because they're about to have their surgery, and like their nurses recommend my videos to amazing. Them. Like, it's really cool when like medical professionals and like healthcare professionals are saying, like, you know, if they've got like a 25-year-old female patient who's like worried about sex and body confidence after a stoma, they're like, hey, watch check out this girl's videos. But one of the things that making that content kind of like opened me up to was really the whole world of disability, which as a sex educator was something that I had ignorantly ignored. That's what the word ignorant ignored. There we go. I'm learning something. And yeah, it just made me realize that that's just like a symptom of our entire society, where disabled people are often left out and not considered. And so I really wanted to start exploring the world of sex and disability, because that was something that I'm already talking about one taboo topic. Let's just like add
You're
in
doing
another.
God's work here, honestly. You're like a shining beacon of hope and inspiration for so many people now.
Oh, yeah, thank you. But yeah, so I started making content about sex and disability and talking to other people about their experiences as well, and just trying to break a lot of the taboos down around it, because I think like even I had loads of misconceptions about it. And then just being like flung into that world. And also I'm just so appreciative of actually all of the disabled people and the disabled community who kind of like took me under their wing and like taught me things about disability politics and all of these different things. So I was just like, oh wow, yeah, this is completely not relevant to my life before, and so now that it is relevant to my life, and unfortunately that's something that is the case with disability a lot of the time. Like if it's not affecting you personally or somebody that
you'll
you
never
know,
think about it. Yeah,
you don't think about it.
That's very true. I realized we didn't explain what a stoma is. A lot of people listening might not know what a stoma is. I'll do my best, but please correct me if I'm wrong.
Go on, do what you've been taught in school.
I better get this right.
Quiz time.
Quiz time. So yeah, a stoma is a connection that is made between the intestines and sort of the skin in the tummy area. And so you mentioned you had an ileostomy. So that would be from the small intestines out towards the skin, and is usually done in people who have inflammatory bowel disease, like you mentioned, or for one reason or another, the latter parts of the intestines aren't working, like the colon. So yeah, it's kind of this bag that sits on the outside of your body, and it's connected to your intestines. Is that a fair fair description?
So yeah, and actually I think it's important to say, so the stoma itself is literally part of my internal organ is on the outside of my body. So I can see my intestine. And for anyone who wants to know, it's bright red. It has no nerve endings, so I can touch it and I don't feel a thing, and it's very like slippery and moist.
Google it if you're listening.
Yeah, and it moves like a worm. It's very fun to watch. Because as it's like pushing the poo like through it, that's the poo isn't, this is my understanding of how the digestive system works, which I don't know how accurate it is, but the poo doesn't move independently through the intestine. The intestine is like pulsing like a worm that like pushes it through. So I can see that happening on the outside of my body. It's so fascinating to watch. If you're not squeamish.
A lot. I know I have a lot of friends who would take a look at a stoma and it's the same reaction to like seeing blood, for example, you know. But I love how you're talking about your stoma and how open you are and how comfortable you are talking about your stoma. You know, as a future healthcare professional, I think it's so important to be having these types of conversations that normalize the idea of having a stoma, you know, so that people aren't embarrassed about it or have anxiety around it, and just general education, as you mentioned. You know, you'll have a lot of misconceptions before you have one, you know. And as you mentioned before, what I wanted to say is, I'm sure there are so many people who are looking for this type of content online, and there's probably only a handful of people speaking about this so openly and, you know, really being positive about it. So, you know, I've said this 3 times now, but I feel like you're doing really good work for a lot of people.
Thank you. And you know, we were talking about demographics before. It's interesting because with the content about IBD and having a stoma and stuff, that reaches people across all demographics, like outside of my like young women demographic. I've got like older people with stomas who find my content, much younger people with stomas who found it. Like I was at a like IBD like charity event, and this like 14-year-old boy comes up to me and it's like, oh my god, I've watched your videos, like thank you for making your stoma videos. And I'm like, oh my god, yeah, because they're not necessarily watching the other stuff on my channel, but they may have come across the stoma content
videos.
I was like, absolutely. You're a viewer, this is so weird. But it made sense because he also had a stoma.
Right. You know, it's it's great. A lot of people that I've seen in the hospital, I was actually on the gastroenterology ward last week, and so there were quite a fair number of people who had stomas in place, and I feel like I saw the whole spectrum of people who were very comfortable about it and, you know, had come to terms with what it is and how to take care of it and talk about it, etc. And then other people who I guess maybe have just received or just had the stoma placed, and it's still this very new thing, life-changing thing, as you mentioned, and they're getting used to it, I guess. So having someone you can look to and watch and who's talking about it. And it's just, it's really powerful. So that's great. Is there anything else you want to say about stomas or disability before I ask you a bunch of other questions?
I think just in general that you can have like a fulfilling life with a stoma, with a disability, fulfilling sex life. It might look a bit different to, you know, like we were saying, that like really narrow definition of sex.
Yeah.
But also one of the things that I've learned from like going through all of this is just how resilient human beings are.
Yeah.
Like physically, like I'm alive. I do not have an organ. I'm missing an entire organ.
and your internal body is like, open to the world, to the environment.
Yeah. And I literally have like an internal organ on the outside of my body. Like it's wild. So like resilient physically with thanks to medicine, but also just how resilient humans are emotionally. Like we adjust. And that is certainly a survival thing. Like when times are tough, we just adjust to it and it becomes like our new normal. And we've seen a lot of that over the last year and a half with the pandemic as well, of just like, we just adjust to things, whether that's good or bad. But it also just gives me a lot of hope, because it means that like we can deal with more than we think we can. Because I definitely hear a lot from people like, oh my God, if I had to go through what you went through, like I have no idea how I would cope. I don't know. I don't think I would have been able to handle it. And the thing is that like imagining something happening to you is so different to something actually happening. And often what I say to people is this, like, the thing is that you just cope. You just get on with it. And oftentimes when you're really sick, like when I was in hospital and people would be like, I don't even know how you're like handling this much pain right now. And I'm like, I'm not, but I have to. I've got no choice.
Just learn to deal with it and manage it as it happens.
Yeah. Which is like a weird morbid thought, but it also, it does kind of like, we have these fears in our heads of like, oh my God, what if I was in like a car accident tomorrow and I became like paralyzed or whatever? We're like, that would be the worst thing that could happen to me. Like oftentimes people think that the worst thing that could ever happen to them is to become disabled, right? That is a fear that a lot of able-bodied people have. But something that I've learned and something that I've heard from a lot of like disabled people that I know, they're literally just getting on with their lives. Like we're just getting on with our lives, and actually disability is not the end of your life.
Yeah. I think it does take a certain type of person with a positive outlook, like a good support system, to sort of go through something as life-changing as being paralyzed or becoming disabled in one way or another. And, you know, as you say, move on with life and carry on and deal with it.
Oh my God, I would not have been able to get through it with like my sunny disposition without like the support of my family, my friends, and my partner during that time. Like, oh my goodness. Yeah. I was very lucky.
Yeah. Speaking of your partner, I saw on Instagram you were married last year.
Yeah, pandemic 2020 wedding.
Belated congratulations.
Thank you.
Okay, switching gears a little bit from that, I want to ask you more about the business side of things, your studio, all the different online channels that you have. And I guess what I want to start with is you're in your studio now. Is that correct? Yeah, I mean... Yes,
I know. It looks like my home, like it could be my home.
I guess.
But I designed it that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a set. Exactly.
Clever, relatable. Home environment. So, I mean, what does your studio look like? Is it close to home? How do you use it for your work? Can you talk to me a bit about why you got a studio? Because I'm very interested. Yeah,
well, so why? Good question. I'd been thinking about it for a couple of years. Like pre-pandemic, I actually was like looking at spaces because I was like, oh, I'd love to kind of have a separate space, but financially and just like the spaces that I was looking at, it just didn't work out. And I'm very glad it didn't at that time, because then lockdown.
Yeah.
But then earlier this year, I was just like, I'm just feeling really creatively stifled from a year at home, not being able to go anywhere. And I'm used to working from home, but I was also just home all of the time. And I was starting to be like, I'd love to be able to do this, but I need more space and all of these kinds of things. And so I started looking again, and basically without any plan of timeline of when I wanted to move somewhere. But then this space became available like sooner than I expected. And I went to see it and I was like, oh, it's perfect. And so it all just happened a bit sooner than I expected. But I'm one of those people that I'm like, when the opportunity arises, like you just jump.
You
because
just jump on it.
It's not that I hadn't thought about it, because I've been thinking about it for like a couple of years.
Yeah.
And then, so it's just kind of like stewing in the background. And then suddenly like the perfect place comes along and I'm like, right, let's go.
Gotta have it.
And it's been terrifying because there's definitely the whole like, oh my God, have I made a massive mistake? Like, is this going to be worth it? But so far, just like having a commute, like actually leaving the house every day and like getting outside, because oh my goodness, in lockdown, I'd have many days where I just would not leave the flat.
Which is so tough. So tough.
It adds up.
Yeah, very mentally draining. Yeah, definitely.
And so it's just been so much fun putting this space together, having somewhere to work. I love it.
And yeah, I mean, have you got like multiple sets for videos where you do, I don't know, sit down talking videos? I know you showed me the little podcast area before.
Yeah.
Oh man, what a dream.
So behind me is like the main filming YouTube set, bookcase and the colors and everything. Love it. And then over here is my podcast studio backdrop. I got like this neon sign which is Doing It, which is the name of the podcast.
Oh yeah, I saw that on your Instagram page.
And then so I kind of when I record on my podcast when I'm on my laptop and stuff, so that I bring my laptop in when I'm doing podcast recordings. And then you can't see this, but on this side of me is like, I bought one of those like little clothes rails, because on my lifestyle channel I often do like fashion videos. So I have like a whole little setup over here where I can like hang all of the clothes on the clothes rail and like have all of that set up. And then I've got my little kitchenette with my microwave.
Nice. Very, very important as well.
Very important. And then obviously right here is my desk with my dual monitors and
that sounds so lovely.
And everything.
Like the idea
and
of
then
having
and then my beanbag.
Oh yeah.
Which is my beanbag is the latest addition, because I was like, I need somewhere just to relax in here, because I only have chairs.
Yeah.
And anytime I needed to relax, I was just lying on the rug. Just like
yeah.
So now I have a beanbag.
I know you can do better than lying on the rug. Yeah. So beanbag is a good choice.
So we've got a beanbag.
The thought of having all these sets ready to go without having to build them up and then tear them down, like honestly sounds amazing. Moving to a studio space seems like the next natural step from being in this room where I sleep, I eat my lunch and dinner, I do all my studying here, I do all my editing, my relaxing.
Oh my God, no.
You know, and like
that stresses me out.
I've been preaching my whole life to all my friends who are like, how do you study so well? How do you focus so well? I always say the same thing. I'm like, I have a dedicated studying space where I do absolutely nothing else but study. And my bed is only for sleeping. My couch is only for chilling. So when I'm in those environments, I don't get confused. Like when I sit down on my desk, I know it's time to study. But having lived in this flat now for a couple of years, I've lost that ability. And like everything I do happens in this room. And it kind of makes it hard to relax, because when I sit down on this chair, all of my environmental cues, everything that I'm looking at, it's like, it's work time. It's work mode. Let's go.
Yeah.
And yeah, it makes it really hard to separate like for me, from my university life, from my working life, from my social life. Everything just like really blends and I'm moving between tasks in all three.
Oh yeah, I totally know how that feels. Yeah. For me, it was like a gradual process. So in my old flat, I didn't have space for a desk in my bedroom, but I filmed in my bedroom. And then I would work from my laptop from the kitchen table. Which was also in the living room. Yeah. And then when me and my partner moved into the flat that we still live in now, that was a 2-bedroom flat, is a 2-bedroom flat. And so that was the first time when my bedroom was just a bedroom.
Yeah.
And it was like game changing.
I'm sure.
And so the spare room became the office and the filming room.
Mm-hmm.
And then after 2 years of that was too much. And so then I moved here.
Needed a bigger space. Yeah. Like every time someone's renovating like a flat in my building, I like knock on the door and I'm like, hey, like, are you renovating this for you? Or is it maybe going to be up for rent soon? So it would just be so nice to have something in the same building where I could go and do all my filming.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
That'd be a dream. Come on.
Yeah.
But that's step number 2.
Yeah. But the growing pains are real. And you kind of have to feel them in order to know what the right next step is for you, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
I wish we could all predict what is the best next step.
Yeah.
But sometimes you actually have to be like, this isn't working.
Yeah. You sometimes need to get to the point where it has to happen. Otherwise you can't move forward. And then that's the catalyst or the push that you need to get it done. For me, I want to first become a doctor and find out where my job is going to be for the next 1 to 2 years, because I could be sent all over the country. Hopefully that won't happen because I'll do well in my exams.
First choice, baby. Come on.
Yeah, exactly. So I need to find that out first, and then I'll think about renting a second space or a studio. But it sounds like a dream.
Yeah.
It sounds like very relieving mentally.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. I just come into this space and I'm like, work mode. Let's go.
Something that I'm becoming more and more interested in, and that I saw you're doing quite well, is Patreon.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you about your Patreon community, how it sort of lives alongside your other channels, and what kind of like time is spent on it, or like upkeep and effort that it needs to run a Patreon community.
Yes, good questions. So my Patreon is called The Common Room. I recently learned that Patreon is 8 years old, and I've been on Patreon for 7 years.
Oh, wow, you got in really early.
I did not realize how early I got in there. I was like, oh shit. Yeah. But my Patreon's gone through many iterations over the years, but currently I feel like in a really good spot with it. So I definitely see it as like building a community of people who are who want to support online sex education, want to be a part of the like production process of what I do, help fund things like having a studio space so that I can work more efficiently and better, and like be able to hire out editing jobs and assistant roles and things like this. So for obviously like Patreon, the way that you manage it is like entirely customizable in terms of depending on you and how and who your audience are and what you think would work best for them. But in general, like the main feature that I think that gets like the most usage of my Patreon is a private Discord server. Which is so fun because basically and I barely have to do any maintenance there. Like obviously I create it, I kind of manage it, but I have moderators as well. But ultimately it runs itself. It runs itself, and it's where community members can talk with each other, because it's not about talking to me. Like sometimes I'm there, but most of the time it's just people just like having conversations amongst themselves about all of these different topics. That's so wonderful that we talk about in videos. But also beyond that, a lot of the times we're just like screaming very excitedly about a new Taylor Swift album.
This idea of community is so central to my like YouTube journey, and why I started on YouTube, and why like I was so motivated to continue. You know, I was reading every single comment. I replied to every single comment up until 200,000 subscribers. And that was the point at which I was like, this is it. Like I was spending hours a day responding to every comment, and I loved it. It was so much fun, but it got to a point where it was like draining me every single day. And I had to tell myself, you have to stop. Like you can't be spending 2-3 hours a day responding to comments.
Yeah. There was, so when I first started on YouTube, you could like leave comments on people's channels, like on the channel as a whole. And up until 1,000 subscribers, every time someone subscribed, I went to their channel and I commented saying, thank you for subscribing.
I really think this effort of being close to your viewers and your community is so key for growth on YouTube. You know, a lot of people just put the content out there and forget about it. But if you don't like focus on the people that are actually watching your videos, it's hard to take off, especially in the beginning, I think. But anyways, back to this this community, this Discord page. It's something that I find so interesting. I think is so valuable to the people who watch. And I actually started a Discord. I think it was like last year. Yeah, a little bit over a year ago, probably. In a couple of days, it had like 5,000 people in there. Everything was just going like way out of control. I couldn't keep track of all the people.
This is why I don't have mine public. It's like Patreon only because I would not be able to handle having a public Discord server because it's
crazy. It's absolutely crazy.
No.
I had no idea what Discord was, by the way, before that, and I like
thrown in the deep end.
Thrown in the deep end. Some people commented like, "Yeah, let's hop on a call. Like, I can help walk you through it." And I was like, "Okay, cool." I hopped on a call with like 2 people from, I think it was like Mexico, India, and one guy in Sweden, and they were just like, "Okay, we're going to set up a bot so that whenever you post a video, it gets put in this channel, and we're going to put another bot so people can have roles and this and that." And I was like, "Okay, let's do it." But then literally a week later, I shut it down. It was so out of control. People were commenting, spamming. People were messaging me saying, "Hey, I'm getting strange messages from X, Y, and Z. I feel uncomfortable." I was like, "Whoa, like this is not what I intended." So you need moderators.
I think if you want to be running a server that size, you absolutely need moderators, and you need like enough people so that everyone can see what's happening. But my Discord server with the Patreon, like, because not all of my patrons
are on the
come
server
to Discord, so I think the Discord server maybe has like a few hundred people, and then obviously not all of them are like really active. There's maybe like, I don't know, maybe like 100 people who are fairly active or something. So it feels manageable.
That's really what I want, and I'm working on starting a Patreon at some point in the future. Because I want this smaller community who's really dedicated, friendly, active, and manageable, importantly. That I can still find time to like connect with, and that they can connect with each other, and we can have this communication back and forth without it just being, I don't even know how to describe it. You know, Discord is like, it's like having a village or like a town or a small city. You know? It's unbelievable. It's an amazing app, and I didn't know much about it back then. But
I love it.
I'm definitely thinking of doing that. Do you find that it takes a lot of your time to keep up the Patreon with sort of the extra content, the posts that you do on the Patreon page involving your community?
So no, but that's because I've like carefully constructed my Patreon in a way that it is manageable. Because when I first started doing Patreon, I definitely overextended myself with the kinds of like perks and stuff that I would give patrons, and it got to a point where it was just really unsustainable, so I just like shut it all down and then like started from scratch again. But my main advice for anyone who's thinking about starting Patreon is like creating perks that no matter how many people are signed up to that tier, your workload stays the same,
that are like scalable easily.
Yeah, exactly. So like I do live streams.
Gonna write this down.
Doesn't matter how many people are signed up. It's still the same time commitment from me. I do a monthly reading list. Doesn't matter how many people I send that to. Same workload from me. And then all of the other stuff that patrons get is just like early access to the public content. So it's not really anything extra on my part. I just have to make sure that I remember to schedule all of that stuff.
Do you upload it to Patreon? Do you upload the videos early to Patreon? Yeah.
Yeah, but with like a YouTube embed link, because it's like an unlisted video.
I see. And then you just make it public on YouTube later on.
Yeah. And then Patreon has like a private RSS feed. So that's where I do the podcast episodes.
Okay. I have this question that I've been meaning to ask another creator for so long, and I like always forget. I have this huge superstition that if I upload a video and I set it to unlisted to show a brand or to show a friend or whatever, and I then make it public, it won't have as good of an initial push because it was previously unlisted and seen by some people.
Yeah, all of my videos are unlisted first because they go to patrons.
All right, fine. I need to just get this out of my head. Like it eats me alive, and it makes me re-upload things so many times. And I like deep down, I know it's not the case, but I needed the affirmation. I think
you just need to do it once with a video that you know is a banger.
Right. See it succeed, and then be fine. Everything will be put to rest. Fine.
It's fine.
Okay.
Because I know a lot of people think that that's the case, but maybe I don't know because I've got nothing to compare it to because every single one of my videos is unlisted first.
I think it's what you said. Just need to do it once and then move on. Forget that I even had this issue to begin with.
Yeah.
Is YouTube your full-time job?
Yeah. So YouTube and everything
around it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Did you go to university and study something first, or did you go straight into YouTube? 'Cause, I mean, you've been doing it since 19, I guess now.
Yeah, so I was at uni, and when I was at uni, I was doing YouTube just like as a hobby, and then it kind of became a bit of a part-time job whilst at uni, I guess. And then and I studied history at uni, because that was all planned before I even started making YouTube videos.
Yep.
And then when I graduated, I was like, okay, I'm going to try and make this a thing. So I moved to London, and it basically got a part-time job whilst I was doing YouTube. And then it got to the point where I was just like, okay, this is making me enough money to sustain myself, and I actually need this extra time that my part-time job was taking up in order to actually like do all of the things on my task list.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of this task list that you have, you've got a lot of things going on. You've got YouTube, you've got your podcast, you've got multiple Instagram pages, the creator table talks before the pandemic.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure there's some other stuff that I'm forgetting about or not mentioning. Patreon. How do you sort of plan your own time? I know you mentioned to me you only work from 9 to 6, I think it was. Was that correct? You wrote it to me in a message,
I try and work normal working hours,
quote unquote,
which happened when I started dating my now husband, because he has a normal job.
Right.
And so it was basically like, well, if we're going to hang out, then I need to be free when you're free, which means I need to work when you're working. So it was kind of like love that, I guess, that made me stick to a regular working schedule. But I just really like it. I like having that like compartmentalized stuff. And then I actually recently did an experiment where I tried a 4-day work week for a month. So I took Fridays off, and I loved it. And
obviously,
and basically,
if you can still get everything done.
And I'm basically continuing. So like Fridays are like a me day, and that could mean I do some work on Fridays, but I don't do things. I don't have meetings. I wouldn't schedule in like podcast recordings like this. It would just be like, no one is expecting anything from me, and I can do what I want. And maybe that's fun stuff, but maybe also I work on the business. So yeah, I enjoy having a schedule.
That sounds very healthy.
Yeah. Because when I was at uni, I basically did uni Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. And then I used weekends and evenings to work on YouTube.
Yeah.
And socialize.
Yeah, of course. Like my problem is that because I'm a full-time medical student now and I'm in my final year, that takes up like a huge chunk of my time, rightfully as it should. And I enjoy it and blah, blah, blah. But that kind of means that all this YouTube stuff kind of just like fits in at any possible time that I can. So like while I'm commuting, like in between things at home, on the weekends, in the evenings, at nighttime. And I definitely am looking forward to when I have my job as a doctor that is from X time to Y time, guaranteed, or not so guaranteed. But I mean, once you come home, there's no more studying to do. There's no more there's no essay. There's no exam you're studying for the most part. And so it'll be a lot easier to sort of separate one and the other, because now everything is like kind of mixed. And sometimes I like that. I like being busy and I like doing things as they come along. And then other times it's like, oh my God, like I have this to do here, I have that to do there. How should I manage my time? What should I split up first? And it can get a bit stressful.
Yeah, I'm so grateful now that I don't have to worry about that kind of thing. And even though like my job is comprised of lots of different projects, it's still just one thing that I have to worry about it, and then I worry about it within these hours.
Yeah.
Is the plan.
All right. I mean, I think that's everything from my end, Hannah. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on. You're clearly a superstar businesswoman.
I try.
Yeah, no,
definitely one of those things that you learn on the job.
Yeah. But you're setting an example for so many people and really providing lots of valuable content. So yeah, you inspire me. I admire what you're doing. And yeah, that's it for me.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me on. This has been a really lovely chat.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously anyone listening, please go follow Hannah on all of her socials. You have your podcast, you've got 2 Instagram pages, YouTube. Go check them all out. Is there anything that I missed or anything else that you'd like to say before we close off?
No, I think you nailed it.
Awesome.
Thank you.
All right. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks so much for coming on. And yeah, talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Fantastic.